We are just letting folks in. It was requested that we play music for you as you came in. I was not in when I think about the legislature, I get very serious, so no room for dancing. Just kidding. But we've got a lot in show for you tonight, so we are going to get started right away. And with that, before we get in, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Gino Nuzalillo. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the campaigns manager at Common Cause North Carolina. And before we get started today, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We are lucky and fortunate to have simultaneous Spanish interpretation provided by our friends at JAMI, who will share their screen and provide a quick video on how to use Spanish language interpretation tonight. So my friends, please take it away.
Este es un espacio multilingüe.
This is a multilingual space.
Please speak slowly for interpreters. Por favor, hablen despacio para los intérpretes. Si está conectada a través de su computadora y quiere escuchar la interpretación del inglés al español, favor de hacer clic en el globo que aparece a mano derecha. Luego haz clic en español para escuchar la interpretación. Si está llamando desde su celular, haz clic en More o Más, luego Interpretation o Interpretación, luego Español y finalizado.
To hear interpretation from Spanish into English, please click on the globe on the bottom right. Then click on English to hear the interpretation. If you're calling from a cell phone, click on More, then Language Interpretation, then English, and done.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, I will share my screen. And if you have questions as you come in, we have many lovely people here today from JAMI who can help you get connected to the Spanish interpretation. We will get started tonight because we are here for one purpose and one purpose only. And the first is what I will say is please mute yourself if you are coming in so that we don't have any sound feedback and so that our interpreters can interpret easily. So if you have not muted yourself, please do. And now we will get to the real purpose we are here tonight, which is to get you ready to advocate with us at the North Carolina General Assembly. As you may have heard, if you are looking at Twitter or Facebook or the news, state lawmakers are busy this year. They are introducing bills and soon passing bills on everything from taxes to the environment to what to do with that huge state surplus, Medicaid expansion, and of course, voting rights and democracy. Now, we know corporations and interest groups have their own lobbyists on Jones Street in Raleigh, but what this state really needs is you, a people's lobby that is ready to show up, and turn out to make sure that your lawmakers are accountable to you. So we are here tonight for that purpose, to learn about how the legislature works and some of the bills that are moving very quickly through the People's House, setting you up for the next steps of joining us in Raleigh. And I promise you, when you meet some of the people here tonight, you will want to spend all your time in Raleigh with them. But it's also going to be helpful for talking to lawmakers in your home districts, wherever you are joining us from in North Carolina tonight. Now, speaking of, as you come into the room tonight, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us who you are, where you're coming from in North Carolina, or if you are outside the state, and what is interested about you tonight and what you'd like to learn from this training. So please introduce yourself and where you're calling in from tonight. And there's a lot to unpack, my friends. So to help us make sense of what is happening in North Carolina and how we can fight back, we are very lucky to be joined with our friends and allies from Emancipate North Carolina, Common Cause North Carolina, Democracy North Carolina, I'm sensing a theme here, and the North Carolina Black Alliance. So I'm going to ask our friends to introduce themselves very briefly, and I will start with Jovita Lee. Tell us who you are, my friend, and who you are representing tonight.
Absolutely. Good evening. I am Jovita Lee. I'm the program director for North Carolina Black Alliance, and I'm also the policy director for our sister C4 organization, Advanced Carolina. It's great to be with you all this evening.
Thank you, Jovita. And next, I will turn it to Carol Moreno.
Thanks, Gino. If we can just go one more slide over, but welcome everyone. My name is Carol Moreno. I'm the Policy and Programs Manager at Democracy North Carolina. We are also a voting and democracy focused organization that has several organizers throughout our state. So really excited to see all the folks that are here tonight. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Gino.
Thank you, Carol. Bob Phillips, we want to hear from you.
Yes, Gino, I like that picture I'm looking at of you, actually, but Bob Phillips, colleague of Gino, Common Cause, North Carolina.
Thank you, sir. And Tyler Day.
Hey everyone, I'm Tyler Day, the Policy and Civic Engagement Manager with Common Cause NC, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Tyler. So let's get started, folks. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Like we said, please introduce yourself in the chat as you come in. We've got over 200 people on this call tonight, and more are joining. So if you have a question that comes up, we've got a lot of time for Q&A at the end. Please use the Q&A function in the Zoom bar below. Keep your questions there. That will make it really easy for us to not lose your question, and we'll make sure to answer it at the end with this all-star panel that you've got. So please feel free to use the Q&A function, and our friends will also be in the chat to help you out as we go along. Now, we have a few group norms for tonight's call. As you can see, we are here to educate, but we are also here to listen. So if you just came in, please tell us again your name, the town you're coming from, and what brought you here tonight. Now, second, we are also nonpartisan organizations. This is a nonpartisan space and a place for nonpartisan solutions to the challenges we face. We know that they want this to be a partisan battle, but that this is about what's right and wrong. This is about the people of North Carolina. And like we said, creating that people's lobby, which all of you will make up. We are also centering racial justice and an intersectional movement in this space. We know that racist and oppressive policies have caused many of the representation and resource inequities in the state over the past few decades and in its history. And it's only this acknowledgement and a fusion movement which calls to the best of North Carolina's history that will help us map a future we can believe in. Finally, we know that this is a long fight, that many of y'all are exhausted. And I'm sure once you hear some of the bills that are moving through the legislature tonight, that will make you even more tired. Many of you have been leading voter registration efforts, monitoring your local officials, educating your neighbors. It is an ongoing fight to protect our democracy and ensure more people can vote in the elections ahead. But that means, in short, we need you now more than ever. It is not just fun language or a slogan or a spin. We need more of the people who are on this call in Raleigh. Oh, and friends, please make sure to mute yourself as you come in. But all to say that we need more folks like y'all in Raleigh. Some of the people you are hearing from tonight spend every day in the legislature and will tell you firsthand that who lawmakers really need to hear from either in Raleigh or in the district you live in is you. And so we're hoping that this training tonight is the start of learning everything you need to know to join us in that fight. So we're going to start by getting to know you a little bit better. So first, again, we're going to ask you to go back into the chat and tell us why you are here. Specifically, what issues do you care about? And what laws do you want to see passed by the General Assembly? Please take just a few moments, either now or later on in the training, to share that in the chat. We are going to make sure we save and capture what's in the chat. So we'd really like to hear from you about what matters to you. And we also have a quick poll question for you to see where people are starting from. So Mr. Brian Warner from Common Cause, would you please launch the first poll? And folks, take just about 30 seconds to a minute. There are 2 questions for you here. First, we want to know how many of you have been to the North Carolina General Assembly. And second, we're asking you if you've ever spoken before to either your state lawmaker, one of your local lawmakers, or both. And so take a few moments to answer those questions. And whoo, they're coming. This is what happens when you got 200 people on a call. They come in rapid fire. We'll give it just a few more moments. And let me.
Don't mind, could you go on to the next slide too? And then.
Thank you, Carol.
On there, thanks.
And I'm taking a moment as y'all are talking to look who is in the chat. I see that we have Senator Applewhite, who represents District 19 in Cumberland County, who is here. Thank you for being here, Senator. We see a few folks who are running, and it looks like we are going to share the results here. Give me one moment, y'all. If you can see, it looks like pretty even split. If you've been to the North Carolina General Assembly, we have 54% of people saying yes and 46% saying no. So we've got a good group here. And it looks like we have about 15% of people who have talked with a state lawmaker, 13 who have talked to a local lawmaker, around 49% who have talked to both. Okay, y'all are showing up and showing off a little. And then we've got 23% who have neither. So I know we've got one goal tonight, which will be to make sure that all of you who said neither, that changes this year. So thank you for participating in that. I cannot imagine that y'all want to hear anything more from me. So let's get into it. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of the night, or if you were like me, the seitan and potatoes of the night. That's what I had for dinner. And let's talk about first the 3 branches of North Carolina's government. Carol Moreno, would you please take it away?
Thanks so much, Gina. As I mentioned before, for new folks on this call, my name is Carol Moreno. I'm the Policy Programs Manager at Democracy, North Carolina. And in North Carolina, just like our government in Washington, D.C., we do have 3 branches known as the executive, the legislature, and the judicial branch. Each has a specific role and responsibilities, and our state government has some key differences from the federal government that we'll be going over tonight. So just to bring folks into the space, we'll be talking about the governors. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. The governor is elected to a 4-year term with a 2-term limit and is tasked with carrying out the state's laws. North Carolina was actually the last state to give the governor veto power, and he does oversee appointments and is actually responsible for about 2,400 appointments to over 350 boards and commissions, such as the North Carolina Utilities Commission and the State Board of Education and judicial positions if there are any openings. The governor also oversees state agencies like the Department of Public Safety and can give pardons to formerly incarcerated people. And most importantly, the governor's relationship with the legislature plays a big role in negotiating our state budget and is subject to checks from the legislative branch, such as appointments that have to be approved by the legislature. The governor also has the authority to call a special session in states of emergency. And one of the most powerful powers of the governor is his ability to override or his ability to veto. So the governor can block legislation that he doesn't want to see passed, or he can decide not to veto it and not to sign it at all. And in those cases, if he doesn't do that, it does become state law within 10 days. The governor can't veto certain pieces of legislation pertaining to redistricting, state or federal constitutional amendments, or local bills that might impact your county or city. And something that we've actually seen in the last 7 years alone are limits to the governor's power. So there have been many attempts led by the legislature to limit the governor's power around issuing executive orders. An example of that is that in 2016, former Governor Pat McCrory signed a law limiting Governor Cooper's ability to appoint members to our state board of elections, which was a clear backlash in the change in party control. And that move was later reversed by our courts. So now we'll be going over the courts, and I'm going to turn that over to Jovita.
Thank you so much, Carol. And so thinking about our North Carolina courts, first starting with the judicial branch is one that interprets the state laws and makes decisions about the laws and decides what happens to individuals or entities who break those laws. So in North Carolina, we have state courts, which include everything from district courts to superior courts and all the way up to the Court of Appeals and the state Supreme Court. Federal courts can also play a role in the state when issues are raised that impact federal law or the U.S. Constitution. We're not going to go quite that deep into that today, but just want to name that in space for folks and for the understanding. And so what's important to know is that the courts can serve as a crucial check. So when we're thinking of check and balance, when other branches of government violate the rights of North Carolinians. And some examples of violating that, or some cases that can kind of highlight that, is CSI v. Moore being one, where state courts have said this: taking away the right to vote for people with felony convictions violates the state constitution. Another example can be Holmes v. Moore, where state courts similarly ruled that voter ID was racially discriminatory, and it was primarily against Black North Carolinians. I know a lot of folks probably on this call have seen the back and forth around voter ID over the past decade. And Harper v. Hall is another case example where North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that partisan gerrymandering violated 4 of our freedoms protected by the state constitution. And even now, as we see, we're back in the conversation around redistricting and gerrymandering as far as our state courts. And so now I will turn it over to Bob to talk a little bit more about the makeup of the North Carolina General Assembly.
Thanks so much, Jovita. And again, I want to thank everybody for being on this call. One of the hats I wear is lobbying the North Carolina General Assembly, like some of the other folks on this call. Welcome you to join us anytime. We really do need you in the people's building, as they say. So the North Carolina General Assembly has 2 chambers, a House of Representatives, 120 members, and a Senate that has 50 members, and members of both houses served 2-year terms, and there are no term limits. Their job is to make laws and primarily in this session, create a state budget. We are in the odd number year, and this is what they call the long session, and it can be quite long. In even years, and next year, 2024 being an example, it's called the short session, and that session begins in May. Even though it is a part-time General Assembly in name, these sessions go quite long. In fact, North Carolina has the distinction of having some of the longest legislative sessions in the country. Most of the lawmaking work is done in committee meetings. The House Committee on Education, for example, or the House Elections Committee, many committees, and this again is where a lot of the work is done. The Speaker of the House and the Senate President Pro Tem oversee both the House and the Senate chambers and are elected by the members of the majority party. The President of the Senate is the Lieutenant Governor of the state and only votes to break a tie. And with strong majorities, the Speaker and the President Pro Tem set the calendar, the agenda for their House, and choose committee chairs. They hold a great deal of power. Now, to talk about how a bill becomes a law, I'll pass it back to Carol.
And Carol, before you start, just a quick note for our speakers to make sure to speak slowly for our interpreters. And with that, Carol, I'll go to the next slide and keep going.
Thank you, Gina. We're just racing along, folks, but if you can go, just wanted to share that slide real quick with folks and we'll move forward one more. And something I do want to say real quickly before we get into how a bill becomes a law is that if you have questions that are coming up for you as you're covering any of this material, please do feel free to use the question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're having trouble with that question and answer function, you can try to put it in the chat, but that function will really help us come back to it at the end of this when we do our Q&A. So with that, I will say, y'all are here to kind of learn how a bill becomes a law. Maybe you heard I'm just a bill song at some point from Schoolhouse Rock. But really, bills start off as an idea. So it doesn't just have to come from a legislator. It can come from any North Carolinian, any of you that see a problem or an issue and you want to do something about it and you want to organize people around it. It can come from a legislator that is advocating for a change on behalf of their constituents. And in order for a bill to be introduced, it has to be sponsored by a legislator in the House or the Senate. Ideally, a bill is strongest when there are sponsors in both chambers, and many times advocacy is needed, whether it's by a lobbyist or by an organized group, to ensure that a bill survives. So once a lawmaker has an idea in mind, they'll work with their staff to write the bill and ensure that it complies with the law. The bill is then introduced in either the House or the Senate. For example, a bill to expand Medicaid in North Carolina for something that is called a first reading. Every bill will undergo a first reading, and the Speaker of the House or the Senate pro tempore will then assign a bill to a committee. As Bob was saying, committees are where a lot of this work happens, and a committee is a smaller group of lawmakers focused on a specific topic that can determine the success of the bill. While there are as many as 2,000 bills that are introduced in a legislative session, only a third make it to a vote by the whole body, which is also known as a floor vote. The committee chairperson may decide not to hear a bill, usually at the direction of the leader of their chamber, preventing the bill from moving forward. And committee meetings are where legislators are also more likely to amend, which means to change the bill or provide recommendations to the legislative body. It's also the best time for you to give your input, since public comment is allowed during this time. And in our next training later this month, we'll be going over how to provide public comment. So make sure that you are staying in touch in our alerts, and we'll provide you more information when that date is announced. If the committee decides to not move forward with the bill, it may go to the full body, or if the committee decides to move forward with the bill, it may go to a full body of either the House or the Senate for a second reading. It could also go to another committee, so it's kind of a choose your own adventure game in the legislature. And if it passes with a majority vote, it will go to the opposite chamber where the process repeats again. If both chambers don't agree to pass the bill as it's written, it goes to something that's called a conference committee, which are members from both chambers. And once they come to an agreement, they will send the bill back to both chambers for approval. And if the bill passes both chambers with a majority vote, it will go to the governor, who can then either veto it, sign it into law, or, as I said before, not sign it at all. And if he doesn't do that within 10 days, the bill does become law. Some bills are not subject to action by the governor, and in such cases, it goes straight to the Secretary of State for filing. And if the governor does decide to veto it, the legislature does have a chance to override that veto and pass the bill into law with a 3/5 majority. The legislature, and this actually just changed recently, does have an obligation to provide at least 24 hours notice that they will be overriding a veto vote. So you'll want to be on the lookout for those that might be happening real quickly. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Gina, to go
Thank
over.
you, Carol. So that is a lot of information, and I can't see everything in the chat, but I can see the little ticker on the Q&A go up. So that means it's good. It means y'all are still with us. And with that, to do a little bit of shimmy, to do a little bit of shake around Schoolhouse Rock and I Am Just a Bill, we are going to take another quick poll to see if you are still with us and if you've got everything that Carol was sharing with you. So this is going to test your knowledge of how a bill becomes a law. Mr. Brian Warner, if you launch that second poll question, this will give you a chance to kind of go through and rank the order in which a bill moves through the General Assembly. Step 1, step 2, step 3, or step 4. You should be, I see, all right, we got some people going in on it. Thank you for bearing with us. We're trying a new little feature tonight with this matching question, and we want to see how folks how folks are doing. And do not worry, we will not kick you out if you get any part of it wrong. We will keep you in the Zoom meeting with us, whether you like it or not, I promise. So we'll give it 30 more seconds. Looks like we got a lot of folks who are making moves. Look at that. Look at as it comes in. Carol, I think you did your job. People are looking at those steps and they are doing a great job with it. And as we're pausing just for people to respond, anything that you see from the chat, Carol, or the Q&A that you want to address before we move ahead?
We do have some questions, but I think we'll try to come back to the ones I'm seeing so far at the end here. But glad to know that folks are getting the hang of it.
Thank you, Carol. And apologies, y'all, for the mouse moving, just trying to make sure I keep all the parts of this machine going. But we'll give it about 10 more seconds. We've got about 70% of people who have participated. So we are there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we'll have to end up there because I was never good at color commentary. But it looks like we've got most folks who've got it. So as a review for what is the kind of steps here, step 1, which most of y'all got, is that an idea is formed on how to amend something or a policy or bill that North Carolina needs. That is step 1. And then step 2 is that a bill in this scenario with these options, that a bill is heard in a committee and it either passes out of that committee or does not. After that, the third step is that actually, and this is where we got the most kind of controversy here, is the bill moves it out of committee, it goes to the full House or Senate, but maybe you have differences between the bills. For example, one thing that we are seeing right now is that there is a difference between the North Carolina House and the North Carolina Senate about what should be in a bill to expand Medicaid. So when that happens, usually at that point, as Carol said, they form a conference committee and get everyone in one room because they love each other and decide how to fix that bill and make sure they have an option they can agree on. After that, the fourth step is that it passes both chambers and it heads to the governor's desk for a veto. So thanks y'all for participating in that. We will share the results there we will stop sharing the results there for a moment. And with that, now that we've given you the basics of how our 3 branches of government operate, because they are always in tandem and oftentimes fighting with each other, and how a bill becomes a law, we now want you to know a little bit more about who actually makes up your General Assembly and ask you the question in your mind as you're going through this about whether you see a General Assembly here that actually represents you and represents the communities you know in North Carolina. So as Tyler Day is showing you this, let us know in the chat whether this is a North Carolina in the legislature that represents you. So with that, Tyler, I will turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Gino. So I'm going to talk about representation in the legislature and just what our current legislature looks like. So in the 2022 midterm elections, all 170 seats in the General Assembly were up for re-election, as they are every 2 years. And 19 of the seats up for election were decided by margins of 10 percentage points or smaller. So those were the competitive races, not very many of them. You can go to the next slide. And we'll take a look now at the North Carolina House. So the leader of the House is Speaker Tim Moore, a Republican representing portions of Cleveland and Rutherford counties. In the House, there were 37 uncontested races in this last general election. So that's 31% of the House races, and 10 incumbents lost their elections. The House of Representatives is composed currently of 71 Republicans and 49 Democrats. Republicans are up 2 seats from the 2020 election, Democrats down 2. Currently in the state House, the majority party, the Republicans, are 1 vote shy of a supermajority. And this means that they only need 1 Democratic vote go along with the Republicans to override the governor's veto. You can go to the next slide. So this chart shows you every North Carolina House seat, and each seat is grouped based upon the seat's political leanings. And the political demographics are calculated from an analysis from Dave's redistricting app. What you can see here is that there's a total of 41 safe or likely Democratic seats and 54 safe or likely Republican seats. The lean seats and toss-up seats are the most competitive, and you can see that there are fewer of them, only 25. Each seat on this graph is color-coded, indicating which party won that seat in the 2022 general elections. So you can see Republicans won all the safe, likely, and lean seats that were favored to them. They also won most of the toss-up seats, 12 out of the 15. Democrats won all the safe seats for them, and they also won all but one of their likely seats. That's District 32, and that district covers all of Vance County and part of Granville County, and is represented by Representative Frank Sossaman. Democrats won all of their lean seats. This just shows you that breakdown of each seat that the parties have. And you can go to the next slide. The North Carolina Senate. So the North Carolina Senate is led by Senator Phil Berger, a Republican representing Rockingham County and portions of Guilford County. And in 2022, 15 races in the Senate were uncontested. So that's 30% of Senate races were uncontested. The Senate is composed of 30 Republicans and 20 Democrats, and Republicans are also up 2 seats in this chamber from the 2020 election. Republicans do have enough members for a supermajority in the Senate, but would need help from the House to override a veto from the governor. So this is showing you the same breakdown that we looked at in the House. In the Senate, Republicans and Democrats won each of the 39 seats projected to them as safe or likely, as expected. But also, as in the House, Republicans won a majority of the competitive seats. They won 5 of the 7 toss-up seats, and 1 seat that leans Democratic. And that seat is District 3, represented by Bobby Hainig, and it includes many of the northeastern North Carolina counties. Next, we're going to talk about a breakdown by gender and race. So there are 33 women in this state house. That means women hold 28% of the North Carolina House seats. Of these women, 25 are Democrats and 8 are Republicans. And the Senate has 17 women. That's 34% of the seats, and 13 are Democrats and 4 are Republicans. And let's look at race. So in the House, there are 26 Black representatives. All but one of them are Democrats. There is 1 Indigenous American and 2 Asian Americans. And that is an increase from none in the last legislative session. And in the Senate, there are 9 Black senators. All of them are Democrats, and there are 2 Indigenous Americans. So before we get to the occupation, I wanted to ask you all if you know how much lawmakers make per year. And you can put in the chat if you have any ideas as to what a lawmaker's salary is. I see too much. 13,000, 14,000, 17,000. Well, see, a lot of people are getting it right, or they're pretty close. So many people don't realize this, but apparently many people on this call do. North Carolina legislators make a base salary of less than $14,000 plus a daily stipend of $104. So on average, a lawmaker may earn somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 a year. They are among the lowest paid in the entire U.S. And this creates a lot of barriers to being a lawmaker because many legislators need to work part-time or full-time jobs while trying to hold their duties in office. So as you can imagine, this means that for everyday North Carolinians, even contemplating running for office feels like an unachievable goal. The most common occupation in the General Assembly, as you can see from this chart, continues to be attorneys, with 36 attorneys in the General Assembly, and that is followed by jobs in real estate and business. And however, there are still lawmakers that serve in ministry, farming, education, and many other fields, and others are also retired. And with that, I will turn it over to Carol.
Thank you so much for providing us all of that helpful data, Tyler. And also apologies everyone for the interruptions, but just want to remind folks to keep yourselves on mute. And one thing I'll say is just looking at the chat, I can already tell a lot of you are really concerned about issues that are also concerning for us, like redistricting. I see that some folks have put in there that they really want to see ranked choice voting passed in North Carolina. Others are really concerned. And you might be wondering, who is my lawmaker? Or maybe you've been doing this work for a while, but we just had a redistricting cycle that might have changed who your representative is. Or maybe, as Tyler is sharing, they're no longer in office. Something we want folks to know is that there is a really helpful tool on the North Carolina General Assembly website, which I'll be dropping in the chat, where you can find exactly who represents you, and all you need is your address to look up that information. And there's also different ways for identifying it, such as looking it up by district, county, or using your voter registration information. So we're just going to drop that resource so people know that you can utilize that. It'll include their contact information. And if you navigate to the North Carolina General Assembly website, you'll also be able to find background info on your legislators, such as what their occupation is, who their legislative assistants are, how to contact them by phone or email. You can even find their addresses on their website, so you can see where they are if you're wanting to do an in-district meeting. And we'll go over a little bit more about contacting legislators at the next training that we have. I'm definitely seeing a lot of great questions in the Q&A section where folks are wanting to know more about how do I talk effectively to my legislator. So just know that that is in the next series. In this one, we're trying to focus a little bit more on the basics. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob to just talk about what kind of issues the General Assembly deals with.
Thanks again, Carol. Indeed, it can be sometimes kind of confusing when we think about, we have the folks at the legislature, our North Carolina General Assembly, then we have elected officials at the county level, at the city level, and of course, federal government, and then sort of which branch of those governments deal with what issues, try to make a little bit of sense of that. The counties are an arm of state government and carry out many of the services that are mandated by the state and federal governments. County governments provide needed services such as public and mental health care, schools, libraries, and support to senior citizens and children in need. Counties establish important local laws, ordinances through federal and state laws, or I should say, though federal and state laws come first. Municipalities, the cities and towns, are established by our state government. They provide residents of a particular area with services like water, sewer, the police, streets, transportation, recreation, garbage collection and recycling, land use planning, and fire protection. These are all typical but not required municipal services. The individual city or town determines which services it will provide based on local circumstances. Basically, all the power flows from the state government, but local governments have the most direct impact on your life. Always something important to remember. So if you go to the General Assembly, what should you expect? Well, when entering the General Assembly, you'll first be asked to go through security, sort of like the airport. You'll see the same kind of regiment there. There are two buildings where members of the public can observe the sausage making, i.e. the legislative process. Both buildings hold offices for both chambers. You have the staff and committee meetings, offices and rooms for that in both these buildings. The legislative buildings hold the chambers where the House and Senate actually meet. And I will actually say this is the 60th anniversary of our North Carolina General Assembly. It was opened in 1963. The legislative building contains not only the Senate and House chambers, but also committee rooms and offices for members and their staff. Members of the public are allowed to watch House and Senate floor debates in the gallery on the third floor of the legislative building. The Legislative Office Building, LOB as we call it, houses members' offices as well as committee rooms. Largest committee rooms actually in the legislative complex are in the LOB. And when observing a committee hearing, you may sign up to provide public testimony. Sometimes, I guess, depending upon the chair and sort of the circumstances of the committee. But when you go in the building, you're going to see some offices and people in them. And to sort of explain who they are and how that works, Carol, I'm turning it back over to you.
Thank you for that, Bob. And Bob is one of the best experts because he's been doing this work for a long time. So I'm excited to have him on this call. And you might be wondering, and I think maybe we can go to the next slide, Gino. Or actually, sorry, go back one slide, my bad. But you might be wondering who's in your legislator's office. And one person you might interact with is their legislative assistant. And I saw a lot of questions about what happens when you try to set up a meeting with the legislator. So when you're visiting your lawmaker, you might meet with their legislative staff. So that could be the legislative assistant or some interns. And something to know about them is that they are really important in being able to share information with your legislator, because often they can be the most powerful people in getting them to have meetings on their calendar or to pay attention to a bill. So don't ever be discouraged if you go in and that's the primary person you're interacting with. And you also might see that there's, in some ways, you'll also see that Raleigh is not the only place where you can meet your legislators. So every weekend, legislators do return to their districts and meet their constituents around that time. We're seeing right now that a lot of votes and a lot of days where legislators are in Raleigh, it's typically Tuesdays through Thursdays. So you might be able to catch your legislator depending on their schedule in your district on Mondays or Fridays. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Gino.
Thank you, Carol. And I'm going to take another pause. We are now, as Sailor Jones likes to say, friends, entering the short rows, and we want to make sure we answer your questions. But we recognize that this is a lot of information. And that's important because one of the ways that legislators and lawmakers can shield themselves from accountability and kind of remain separate from the people's lobby is the fact that there is a lot of information to know how to engage. So we hope that in part, even though you get to hear our lovely voices a lot tonight, that this demystifies a little bit how the legislature works. And if you stick with us for the 201 trainings that are to come, we are going to spend a lot more time with power mapping and talking to each other about how we might want to engage in the legislature. And we'll need to do that because there are a lot of bills that are moving through the legislature right now that we want you to know about. This is not an exhaustive list, but we are very fortunate to have the foremost expert on these bills with us tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Jovita Lee to just tell us about a few of the bills that are concerning and that you should have on your eyeballs or your minds. Jovita, take it away.
Thank you so much, Gino. And so as stated, this is barely scratching the surface for things that have been drafted and filed in our North Carolina General Assembly, but just to highlight a few, starting with HB 40, folks have probably heard a lot of conversation around this bill. This is the previously known bill, HB 805. I don't know if folks remember summer 21. This is a vetoed bill, HB 805 is. And so this is the rebirth of that bill. It's an anti-protest bill. It does have bipartisan support, and it has passed the House in its first reading in the Senate. So right now it's still currently in the Senate. It can be heard as soon as the 14th of next month, as far as in Senate rules. This legislation is particularly dangerous because it is a bill that will criminalize protest, and its language misrepresents protesters, especially when we're thinking about folks who are Black, Indigenous, or a part of other communities of color. And it paints them as dangerous and violent, and it uses language like riot. And so it will also have an impact on our voting population when you think about the harsher penalties that will be created by the harsher sentences that's also proposed in the language as well, and that could result in folks losing their right to vote. And so, of course, this is a bill that we are actively lobbying against, and we need all the support that we can get in lobbying against that. And so I know that Carol, one of our experts, will drop the link in the chat to our action alert around HB 40. And so that will be dropped in the chat. Another bill that I do want to cover is SB 89, which is the Prohibit Private Money in Elections. Is previously known as SB 725. What you'll realize in this process is that a lot of bills are just rebirths of old bills. So they take language that they presented 1 to 2 years ago. If it was something that was vetoed or did not go through, they would just take it, tweak it a little bit, and represent it in the next session. But to go forth, this was, again, a bill that was vetoed by Governor Cooper, and it would prohibit the state and local election administrators from receiving private funding. And so this bill also does not designate any replacement funding for elections. And so this is extremely harmful to counties, but especially rural and low wealth counties. And these voters in these counties would be the unintended casualty of this bill. Going into the next bill, it's SB 88, which again, previously known as SB 326, and it was also vetoed as that version, would change existing election law and make it harder to vote by mail by removing the 3-day grace period for an absentee ballot on election day. Moving into HB 123, this is also a voting related bill, and it will reduce early voting to a 7-day period. Now, this is also incredibly important because in just the previous election in 2022, over 50% of voters utilize early voting. And so this is an essential avenue to be able to vote and for folks to be able to cast their ballot. And so reducing that time is absolutely not helpful. As far as HB 17, which is the next bill that we want to cover, and we'll go through the slew of these bills right here, that will amend the North Carolina Constitution to elect members of the State Board of Education and make the Superintendent of Public Instruction the chair of the State Board of Education. And it will also give the NCGA power to draw districts for their election. HB 66, it requires Catawba County Board of Education members to be nominated in primaries and elected at general elections beginning in 2024. Previously, they were elected at general elections based on the number of vacancies, and require board candidates to file their notices of candidacy at the same time as other county offices. Previously, it was a described date. And so we'll see that bill, and then down on the list, SB 72 is the Senate version of HB 66, just for context. And then the last one that we'll highlight for tonight is SB 103, which requires beginning in 2024 that Henderson County Board of Public Education be elected on a partisan basis at the time of the general election in even numbered years as terms expire for 4-year terms. And so those are just some of the Board of Education elections that will be shifting or has been proposed to shift through these bills. And Gina, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Jovita. And let's take a brief moment. I just came off sharing my screen, and the first thing I saw in the comments was, What and wow. So clearly y'all have been following with us. That is how we feel every single day seeing some of these bills move through. So let me just say really quick, now we are going to come and answer some of the questions you've been putting in the Q&A function as we've gone along. But please do know that you will get a recording. You will get this script that we are reading from and the training guide. You will get a shorter resource. You will get all of this both in print and in recording to make sure you have it and that you can share it with whoever you want. So I know it's a lot of information, but you are going to get all of it. And so because I have not been looking at the Q&A function, I see we've gotten a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask my colleagues, Carol and Brian, where do we want to start? What's one of the first questions that we want to hear tonight?
Well, Danielle, I can kind of start us off with just some of the questions we've already answered. So for folks that are able to see their Q&A function, you can see some of the responses there. But a lot of the questions I'm seeing from y'all tonight are exciting because you're wanting to go deeper. You want to know more about how to have effective relationships with your legislators, how to message to them effectively, how to ensure that a bill you don't want to pass is blocked. And so we'll be going over some of those strategies and skill building at our next training, and definitely want to encourage y'all to stay in touch so that we can share out when that date will be. A lot of the things that and as Gino said, we'll also be sharing some resources and PowerPoint slides. I think there was a good question. So there's a question here, and Bob, I might turn it over to you to respond, but someone asked, with the new operational procedures, so thinking of new House rules that were recently passed, how can we protect the governor's veto ability?
And Carol, your internet was going out in and out a little bit again. Could you just try repeating the question you wanted Bob to answer?
Definitely. Sorry about that, folks. We'll see if the video turning it off helps. But there's a question with the new House rules, how can we protect the governor's veto ability?
Well, Carol, and of course, we were very worried about the House rules when they were proposed as so-called temporary rules. And then it was going to be that the Speaker or the President pro tem, or the Speaker, this was more the House, I should say, could have just pulled up a bill at any moment. Now there is this 24-hour notice that is provided. But even that said, and I think there was a question about what is a majority made up, and I guess that question might have been speaking to what does it take to override. And in the House, it's 72 votes, and Tyler had indicated, what the margin of Republicans and Democrats, only one vote shy of the supermajority for the majority party, the Republicans, having that. So in terms of preserving, or the governor can veto, the big thing is whether the House is going to have the might to sustain or override. So not a lot of public notice, not as much as there had been 2 years ago when it was more of a 48-hour kind of notice. And it's very concerning, obviously. So I don't know. Hopefully I answered that question from the person who asked it.
Thank you, Bob. And let me say two quick things. I see our presenters, because there are a lot of questions, because we've got 237 people here, which is fantastic. If you are one of our experts, please feel free to type answer responses to those that are coming in the Q&A. And I also want to say that it is really amazing to see y'all interact with each other in the chat. With some of the questions you've been asking, people are responding and sharing their insight, which is amazing to see. Now, one question that has come from our friend Evan Richardson is, how typical is it that 30% of the races for representative in North Carolina are unopposed? And that gets to the heart of what we talk about with redistricting and representation, and whether we actually have competitive districts. We have competitive districts that actually force lawmakers to be accountable to us So Jovita, I may turn that question to you first for your thought on how typical it is for 30% of those races to be unopposed, and then may ask Bob for you to come in as well after Jovita.
Sure. And so a little bit about my thoughts around that is exactly what Gino said. It is a connection back to redistricting and gerrymandering, which all of our organizations work on tirelessly each and every year. And so a lot of that does connect back to how districts are drawn, kind of the remnants of what we've seen in previous redistricting and gerrymandering cases, and also, kind of how everything has been formed to kind of prioritize one over the other. Also, as far as districts not representing common interest when it comes to issue areas of concern, when it comes to racial makeup, and a lot of different factors that would be included. But it definitely does connect back to kind of the remnants that we've seen over the last decade and longer of gerrymandering in this state, and kind of that impact, and kind of seeing in real time what that can look like here in Raleigh for the NCGA and how our representation can look. And I will pass it to Bob to continue answering that question.
Thanks, Jovita. I mean, we actually have had cycles back maybe in the aughts where a majority in a chamber ran essentially uncontested without even an opponent. And then we have sort of when a candidate is winning by 10% or more, it's for all practical purposes a safe seat. A lot of factors at play. And generally what we see is the further you get away from the year of the new map going into effect, say in this case 2021, and there'll be new maps drawn this coming year, unfortunately. I say that because we wish that the legislature wouldn't do that. But the further you get away from when the maps are adopted is when you begin to see even more uncontested races, because the gerrymandering entrenches those districts, and it becomes apparent that there are safe seats, and it's harder for the minority party often to field candidates closer into the year ending in 0, when that is the election that actually matters, who's going to control to get to draw the maps, is when you begin to see a little bit more competition. But gerrymandering is everything. And as Jovita said, when you don't have competitive districts, it's hard sometimes for parties to actually field a candidate, indeed, where you have, 2 candidates running for a seat.
Which is why we are in court right now, Bob, to try to fight for those maps that the legislature refuses to give us. And friends, we are now getting to the kind of final minutes here, but I saw a great comment in the chat from Ms. Sally Ann Hobson. It's almost as if I slipped you $5, my friend, but you said that you called your representative's office about HB 40 and he picked up the phone and you asked if that is common. And that's part of the trick here. Your state lawmakers, especially in your districts, might be more accessible than you think. And so that leads to another question from our friend Gan, who asks, what's the trick to getting a meeting with a lawmaker? And Carol, what's that trick for getting a meeting for your lawmaker? What would you recommend? Because anybody on this call can do it. Anyone can meet with your representative at any time. So Carol, what is the trick?
Tell them who you are. I think lawmakers are more willing to listen when they know that you're a constituent, when they know your story, they know what you represent and why you're there. And it's really important in those interactions that you let them know, hey, I'm a voter, and maybe I did or didn't vote for you, but this is an issue I care about, and I'm a constituent, and I would like to talk to you about. And know that you're also not alone in those meetings or in those requests. There are a lot of great organizations on this call that are willing to connect you with your lawmakers and are willing to help you have the right talking if there's a bill that you really want to dive in with them. And we have a lot of opportunities for people to go in and lobby, or if you're wanting to do it on your own, to also draft a letter to them, to make a phone call. And oftentimes that gets their attention more than a message that's just crafted by someone and not as personalized as raising their hands. Tyler Day, who can also give some thoughts on this as well.
Yes, I just wanted to say as well that even if you don't live in that representative's district, if you live in the county, I would highly recommend letting them know that, because as often as we redistrict in North Carolina, they know that it's very possible that in the next redistricting cycle that you could be their constituent at that point. So let them know that.
Thank you, Tyler. And Bob, yes, we'll give you the final word, my friend. And I promise we'll get y'all out of here just a few minutes past 8.
Yeah, so sorry. I was just going to say again, it's the people's building. You have every right. It is your First Amendment right to come. And even if you can't get an appointment, never think that in terms of if you call ahead of time, if you show up and you go to the member's office and you tell them who you are, just like Javita and Carol and Tyler have said, sometimes you can get in. These folks are surprisingly more accessible in that sense than you may think. One thing, they have no private bathrooms. They have to use the same facilities that we all do. And you see them, they will go out of their offices. And, some of us who lobby the legislature, and sometimes when we're having a hard time, getting up with a member, we'll simply just wait outside the office. And when they're walking to a committee meeting, we'll say, hey, can I walk with you? Can I talk to you? You can do that as a citizen. And if you, again, as Javita and Carol have said, letting them know who you are, and if you're connected to them by a constituent or in the county, it works. Even the folks that we have trouble with, they're not supporting the issues that we want them to. Generally, they're cordial enough and will often give you a meeting. So come to the building and make yourself known and show yourself. And I think you might have a good chance of getting in to see the member.
Thank you, Bob. And friends, it is 8:02. So I'm going to close us out here and give you some of the next steps. But I just wanted to note that there was questions in the chat about not getting discouraged, about how we kind of find a good nonpartisan way of holding lawmakers accountable. And I just want to address that for a moment to say that this call tonight, the fact that you showed up for an hour on a Monday evening to really get the basics of the legislature, we recognize it's not always the most exciting and interesting thing, but the fact you're here, that you're interacting with each other in the chat, is exactly the steps that we need. Because we know that the legislature, that this is not a working government for working people, and that it does not work for many of us. And so building that people's lobby, working together to understand how power works so we can influence it, it's all part of the steps to come. And so part of why I don't get discouraged is because I get to spend time with people like you and the experts on this call and realize, in the words of our friends, that we are all that we have. And so I really do believe that. And the fact that we are getting trained here tonight is exactly what we need. We had over 400 people register for this training, which not everyone can come to it, but you can see we had over 200 stay for an hour plus. We've got another 300 people who are going to join us on Thursday for the daytime training. So that's where it starts, my friends. And that means that our next step is that if you are here tonight, you will receive an email for the 201 training. The 201 training is going to dive deeper into power mapping and power analysis. It will also have time to split people up by the region that you are in, to get to know other people in your region, and to strategize a little bit more about your lawmakers and what may be on the agenda for folks in Eastern North Carolina versus those in the mountains. So those trainings and those dates will come. You will get an email directly from us when they are scheduled. You also have a number of ways, depending on which organization you want to be with, to stay on top of bills as they are being filed. I will ask my friends Carol and Jovita, Tyler and Brian to drop in the chat the links that you can use to sign up for legislative alerts. Those will be ways when a new bill comes every day and I want to start crying a little bit, you can cry with us. And then finally, one of the next steps is to please make sure you share the resources that'll come to you. Tomorrow, you'll receive an email with everything you saw tonight, and we highly encourage you to share them and adapt them for your communities. And with that, if you had questions that didn't get answered tonight, we can make sure to follow up with you via email. And we've also saved the chat. But thank you so much for being here, and we will see you again. Have a great night, everybody.